Okay, so this is now saying that this is live. However, I am not seeing that on my end. Is it live now? Okay, yeah, I'm now seeing that it's live. Okay, so people on the YouTube stream, can you actually hear me? Okay, cool. So I can see that other people can see that this is live, but can anyone hear me? Am I just speaking into the void? Yay, okay. All right, thanks everyone for putting up with that nonsense. Again, I don't know what I am doing, so thank you for dealing with that. Thank you for the crab. Nice, yes, thank you. Okay, so let's get rid of the crab. Right, so it has actually been a hot minute since the last time I tried to live stream. For the people here who have watched me do this before, you know that in general I don't know what I'm doing, but also that I usually stream to Instagram and Twitch at the same time. I've stopped doing that because I just can't deal with Instagram's weird cropping anymore. It's just not really an ideal platform for this sort of thing because since I'm using Photoshop, it's ideal if you can see a 1080p screen of it, and Instagram's cropping is like 19 by something. It's not ideal. So I'm not going to be using Instagram for these streams anymore. So apologies for that, and also just remember this is not going to be professional because this is more of a hobby thing, and it's the first time I'm trying to use YouTube, hence the issue. As it turns out, by the way, the issue was that I have to click a button to say go live, which I didn't realize because the countdown timer made me think that it was just going to start. So yes, that is on me. But now we can start. So this is going to be a little bit different than my normal sort of art streams. Like normally I would be showing you guys like Comic-Con stuff. But unfortunately, even though we did do like Comic-Con Cape Town this year and Comic-Con Joburg this year, I got so unbelievably sick after the Comic-Con Cape Town that I did not actually like get back to streaming. So I haven't streamed in months, and I'm hoping to continue streaming like more regularly as a thing in the future. And like, yeah, I hope that that is something that I will be able to do. Okay, and I'm also being told there's a bit of a delay, which I think is normal. I feel like unless we have like crazy internet, which we don't, just like no one does. If you do, then great, but I don't think anyone does. That's just a thing. I'm just gonna be... Yep, all the void chats. So I'm just going to be grabbing my second screen to make sure that I can respond to YouTube chat messages as those come in. And I will also try and respond to the Twitch messages. I only have two screens, so this is a little bit of a moving between the two. Okay, yeah, so I went off into the weeds and didn't actually explain what I'm doing here. So this stream, I'm going to be making some Chibi characters. So Raffion has commissioned some Chibi characters as well as Carter Black. Thank you guys very much for letting me use your characters for demonstration purposes. So I'll be working on those commissions during this stream, but I'm also going to be just doing some kind of fan art Chibi commissions, just so that I can showcase stuff. So generally when it comes to the Chibi characters, I quite like doing these because they're a lot quicker than like the high resolution, lots of detailed stuff. I mean, generally that's going to be the case because it's a simplified character. But also like the colors are simplified. There's not a lot of shading or anything like that. And it's kind of a different approach as well. So I have this Chibi Karlak that I've already started the line art for, because it's actually quite a complex character. Even when it's being simplified down to a chibi, like she's got all of these straps on her top half, and like just doing those in a rendered version is such a hassle. In a chibi version, it's also a hassle, kind of depending, but like because it's a chibi, you can get away with more. So for example, if I don't want the whole strap thing, I can just kind of reduce it to like sort of thicker straps, and it's still going to read as the same character. So I can actually go in and like remove some lines, and you still get the general impression without it being all of these straps. Now, I went and drew all of the straps yesterday just because I was in a bit of a hyperfixation mode, so I didn't, I wasn't like thinking about having to erase them today, but just if you are looking to do your own sort of simplified art, generally things like straps, lots of belt buckles, lots of things like this, you can simplify the number of those. Even things like the number of fingers, just in general with like more simple characters, you could make your hands 4-fingered. I prefer 5-fingered hands, even if I'm doing chibi characters. I think they look better. But if you're, for example, going to be animating your character, then the choice of 4 fingers versus 5 fingers starts to matter a little bit more, because like in animation, especially if you're animating traditionally, having to account for 5 fingers is work. So 4 fingers is slightly less work. Now I'm just going to turn off flow because that's what's giving me like this opaque line. And the other thing that I do with the Chibs that I don't really do when it comes to the rendered pieces is I turn on what's called smoothing. So for those who are interested in more of like the logistics of arting digitally, what smoothing does is if I draw a line, right, like that, if I turn on smoothing, like if I turn it on to 50% and I draw the same line, smoothing adds lag to my brush stroke, which means that it's easier for me to draw really straight lines, curves, whereas if I don't have smoothing and I try to do the same thing, like I'm pretty like practiced with doing this, so it's better, but like especially if you're not like used to using a digital pen or something, you're gonna see like little jagged edges with your line because like your hand shakes as you draw. That's just like being human. Human beings have shaky parts, and unless you're doing a very quick motion, it's hard to exactly get a shape in one fell swoop. It's not impossible. Like, people have drawn line art for years, traditionally on paper, and like there's a lot of technique involved in that. However, if you are looking to just draw sort of for yourself for the first time, I would highly recommend putting on smoothing. I put on smoothing mostly because for me, I really struggle with drawing inorganic things, so like straight lines, kind of perfect curves. I particularly struggle with that, and more recently, I am also struggling with like my hand is starting to cramp up a lot more because I am unfit and also old. So yeah, arthritis in the future is a real possibility. So yeah, with all of these, the smoothing is kind of helpful. So like experiment, like you don't necessarily need 100% smoothing because that slows down your brush strokes so much that it might actually feel like there's something wrong with your computer. But just experiment with the percentage. I usually use between 30 and 50% if I'm drawing anything that's sort of like this, but it might be different for you. Okay, so I've got smoothing turned up to 100 on my eraser. By the way, you can put smoothing on your erasers as well, which is nice if you want to kind of clean up lines that you've made. So like I want to create a taper for the ears here and for the finger. You also get softwares that are much more suitable for this sort of character design. Like I generally use Toon Boom Harmony for animating, and for designing more simplified, stylized characters. And that software has a lot more tools that are specifically built to make your life easier when it comes to things like creating a tapered line that is very perfectly smooth, or creating like a filled color on the back of a line art thing that you've done. Photoshop isn't really built for that. So like it has some of the functionality that works for that, but it's not really what it's for. I mean, Photoshop is for shopping photos. It's for editing photos first and foremost. The fact that I can use it for painting is nice and awesome, but like that's not what it was built for. So in general, a lot of that is going to be, yeah, it's just going to be a thing. Like it won't be perfect, but it will be good enough. And or it won't be perfect, but it's what you've become used to. So I am quite used to using Photoshop. I use Photoshop for drawing 100% of the time. There's lots of other softwares. You don't have to use Photoshop. In fact, I think a lot of people prefer not to use Photoshop for drawing purposes, but I do. So that's why I'm going to be drawing in that today. So I'm just fixing up some of these lines that aren't looking great, and I'm also just adding in some other details, like she's got like belts, so many belts going around here. So like here with the pants as well, I don't necessarily need to draw all of these cuts because, yeah, that's a lot. So instead I'll just kind of draw the indication of those crisscrossing lines. I think they're just like sewing the pants together. Like if your pants are this ripped, just let them go. That's all I have to say about that. Yeah, GIMP and Fire Alpaca, just answering comments in the YouTube channel, they are definitely a thing. GIMP is notoriously terrible for drawing purposes. Like, if you need to make... Like, GIMP is kind of equatable to MS Paint. It's very rudimentary. If you just need to, like, write some text or something, then that is totally fine using GIMP. I'm going to turn off my smoothing because I cannot draw a perfect circle. Fire Alpaca I've never used. I have heard that it is useful for certain things, but there are much better softwares, in my opinion, that are out there, like Krita or Krita. I don't actually know if I am pronouncing that correctly. Is a free software that is way better than GIMP. Like, it's pretty equatable to Photoshop, actually. And it's free. So, you know, you can't beat the low, low price of free. It's just that it does have more stuff. Like, anytime you're using a professional grade version of something versus, like, a serial grade version of something, and serial, I mean, like, C serial, like, nom 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 nom, not, like, serialized, you're going to find that the quality is not necessarily going to be anywhere near the same. But it's kind of the trade-off, right? Like, if you open up Photoshop, there's like 5 million tools in Photoshop and things. So for a beginner or for someone who's never seen any sort of software like that, it's super intimidating. But at the end of the day, like, it's not that it's a complicated software, it's just that it has a lot of stuff. And, you know, you're probably not going to be using most of that stuff. Like, I only use sort of the painting tools with Photoshop, so in general, I only use, like, the paintbrush, the eraser. Sometimes I'll use gradients. Sometimes I'll use the selection tool. But other than that, like, that's 3 tools. The only other thing is just figuring out where stuff is. So, you know, there's a learning curve. With everything, there's a learning curve. But I feel like it's not that bad. Okay, so I'm not going to draw the axe just yet. I kind of want to save that till the end. And again, because Karlach has so many straps and things, I kind of want to get the coloration of those out of the way. So I'm going to firstly delete all of these references that I'm not using. So I'm not using that one. That one I can hide. Oh, wait, actually, I am going to use that one because that's the one that's going to give me my color palette. And then I have my layer that I'm currently working on. I'm going to rename this, so it's called Karlach at the moment, and I've spelled Karlach wrong because her name ends with CH. I'm going to call this Lines. The reason that I'm doing that is so that I am very clear on what layer is doing what. Just a general rule of any sort of digital painting, digital artwork, digital whatevers. Name your layers, because if you don't, you're going to get confused later on when you're trying to find a layer that you need to change something on, and every layer is called layer 8, layer 6, layer 5, layer 4, 3. Yeah, like you don't, what does that mean? That doesn't tell me what the layer actually is. So, I have the lines. I like to make a copy of the lines because when I do my chibis, I do tend to do a lot of editing on the line art, and I just want to be able to go back if I need to or see if something looks better before I changed it. Now, this is kind of destructive editing and is generally not a good idea, but like it's just how I do things sometimes. And then I'll create a new layer and I'm going to call that Karlach Color. I'm also distinguishing which character this is because I actually do in this scene have other characters that I potentially want to do in the same workspace, so this is going to keep me a little bit more organized. Even more so, I'm going to group them, so just selecting both layers and putting them into a group, and I can call that group Karlach. So then when I go and clean up this file later, it's much easier to find, like, okay, these are all the Karlach layers, and I can turn them on and off. These are all the Astarion layers, I can turn them all on and off, etc. Right, so I've got my lines, and I've got my color underneath. I'm now going to go into my paint bucket. Now, I'm probably not going to be able to use the paint bucket very effectively because I still have, like, a bunch of open spaces. If you've ever used any graphic software, open spaces are your enemy, because if there's any open spaces, like even these lines here, you see there's like a tiny space. Just gonna zoom in to get super pixelated. There's a tiny space here between the lines. That's gonna cause a problem because the paint is gonna bleed into her hair if I try and just fill it with the paint bucket tool. And unfortunately, trying to not have open spaces is really, really hard. Like, it's not impossible. Again, it comes down to technique, but it's not the most practical. And again, there's other softwares that exist for this exact purpose, and those softwares actually give you things like strokes. Strokes are tools that allow you in Toon Boom, because it means something different in other graphic softwares. But like, you could add a stroke to a line and essentially it will fill in those gaps for you. You also have like automated tools that do that work some of the time. Like, it depends. So I'm just going to go into my color layer, and I'm going to make sure that in my paint bucket tool I have all layers selected at the top. That way it's going to keep in mind what's on my line art layer as well as my color art layer. And I do want that. And I'm just going to start filling in the skin tones. So with things like Chibs, I could take a direct tone from her skin. However, a Chibi is going to be super simplified. Even in like the color of it is going to be super duper simplified, which means that it's not going to really look the same because it's just a solid color. Like if you look at this reference, which is I think someone's like painted resin print model, in this reference, like there's a lot of different colors here. If I go in with the color picker, you can see there's like very dark reds, there's very light browns, and very, very light pinks. And when those come together, your brain kind of averages those colors to give you the idea of, oh, okay, she has red, like light red skin. But it's actually like it's a bunch of different colors. So if I now on the Chibi just put in this light red, I should probably get rid of my sketch background because that is going to get in the way. Yeah, like that's quite bright on the Chibi. If I were to just leave her face this color, it would look really, really bright, which isn't necessarily a problem, but in general, with Chibi art where it's simplified, you kind of want to start from either a mid-tone or something darker. So I'm going to go and find the darker shadows on her skin, and I'm just going to select that. So I think that works better. And again, we're going to have bleed over. That's just unavoidable because these lines are not perfect. And also, like, with her eyes, because, like, Chibi eyes and anime eyes don't necessarily close off, so that's going to be an immediate problem anyway. What you're also going to find, and this is going to be the case regardless of all your settings, is there's going to be a little bit of feathering. So, like, between this area and this area, we do have these areas where the paint did not get in. So there's like little pixels that remain unpainted. And like you can increase your tolerance, turn on anti-aliasing and contiguous, and that will help. But like at the end of the day, if you're doing this in Photoshop, not in like a vector software like Illustrator or Toon Boom or something like that, it's just going to be an issue that, you know, you'll have to contend with. It's not a huge issue though, because if I just turn off my smoothing, because I don't want my smoothing here, I can literally just go in and fill in those areas myself. It's also showing me like with the eyebrows and the line art there, like that's not perfectly filled in. So with Chibis, it is kind of a balancing act between how vector perfect you want it to look and how much control you want over those tiny details. So like if I take out the lines, you can see that like it doesn't fill in those black areas, which means that I'm going to get that aliasing. But it also means that like eventually I will need to merge these layers together. Otherwise, there's going to be issues where I might like see some of the color behind. So you're basically just going to see that in those areas. So I've already fixed that, and it took like 5 seconds. So it wasn't that big of a deal. And I think that looks pretty good. Also, just keep in mind, like, at what level someone is going to see your character, because if this is for, like, a D&D campaign, or someone's going to print this, you just need it to look as good as it will at the maximum distance at which it's going to be viewed during print. So during print, that's something that you need to set up at the beginning. So you need to make sure that your canvas is at least 300 pixels per inch, so at least 300 ppi. If it's less than that, you are potentially going to run into pixelation issues. You can make it more than that, but that's not necessarily going to help unless you're doing like a billboard or something. But yeah, 300 ppi is going to generally give you what you need. So I'm just going to take some of the dark red of her lip color as well. It's like there. And then I can use that to fill in the top lip. So that's not as dark as it looked. Let's just zoom in a bit closer. Yeah, it's not as dark as it looks, because again, like this is in the context of the rest of the color on the image, not on what you're doing here. So what looks like a dark color on one image is not necessarily going to be a dark color on the other image. So I am just going to paint that and kind of fix up that line. So now I have an upper lip and a lower lip. Generally, when I do chibis, I prefer this sort of shorthand where the top lip is going to be a dark color and the lower lip is the same color as the skin. I think it just makes a lot more visual sense. And it provides like an immediate like, oh, I understand that that means that the top lip is the top lip. And I'm just going to, using a darker tone from the beginning, from the flesh tone that I chose, I'm just going to kind of paint in shadow areas. So you don't have to do this. It kind of depends on how much depth you want in the character's eyes, as well as whether or not that's a style that you like. So it's going to give the eyes a certain look. I think on characters that are wearing makeup, it works really well to kind of indicate that they are wearing makeup. On other characters, it's not necessarily going to work as well, so at your discretion, do that. Cool. I will also fix up the eyes. So at the moment, this part of the eyes are filled with red. So still in my color layer, I'm just going to make a little thing of white, and then I can fill the rest of the eye. Now you're going to notice that there is some feathering that's going to occur. You can go again, so just keep clicking the area until that fills in. That is going to cause bleed, so it is going to like, it doesn't look that bad here, but it is going to cause that color to bleed out more, and that doesn't always look very nice. Here I can get away with it because I have the line art layer over that. But I'm also not going to leave her eyes like stark white like that, because that is quite bright compared to the red. So it's going to make her eyes look kind of glowy. In some cases, that's what you want. You want your character's eyes to look bright and vibrant and glowy. In this case, her eyes are not super glowy, at least not the whites of her eyes, so I would rather that not be the case. And I can fill in the yellow there. Again, here we have a yellow in her eyes that's like surrounded by red, so I could maybe add that in either with the pupils or with the line around the pupils. It really comes down to like what the final version that I want to look like. I think I would rather add it around the pupils, so I'm going to make the pupils black. And this is now like an assumption that her pupils are going to be black, and they're going to remain black. Now I can go in and start fixing these horns. So this is now where I'm going to just color this in using my brush and as much precision as I can be bothered to have to fix these areas. I tend to kind of just do the edge in a different color because that then gives enough that I can use the paint bucket to fill the rest. It doesn't really matter. Like if you're doing this for relaxation purposes, you might actually enjoy the catharsis of going through and painting it very carefully yourself. I am a very impatient person, so I'm just going to do that. And again, if I now take away my line art layer, you'll be able to see that some of that old color is still left behind because it is still feathering out. If you want to fix that, you can, but just be aware that sometimes it's not necessary because if it's going to be covered up by the line art anyway, there's not really a point in doing that. But you might feel like there is. So in that case, by all means. So I'm just kind of cleaning up these edges just a little bit. Like my lines are quite thick, so I can get away with cleaning up the edges. Sometimes if you've got like really, really thin line art, the cleanup is worse. And okay, so that's part of the hair. So this is also something that like is somewhat unique when you're doing a stylized character because everything is just a line. Like for me to understand that is this line, so is, because you guys can't actually see my cursor, is this line here a part of my hair or is it a part of my horn? That might not be evident if you didn't draw it. So if you're coloring someone else's line art, that might not be very evident. So areas like that, mistakes do happen and that's fine, but it's something to be aware of. So I will just fill that in with black so that I don't accidentally assume that's part of her horn. So I'm just going to fill it in with black and just fix that outline. It's a lot easier to see if the outline isn't going over the line properly when it is black on like light gray like this. Sometimes it's not that easy. And with the broken off piece of her horn, it actually doesn't really look like that in the original reference, but again, you're taking some liberties. So I can make this a little bit lighter than what is there. So I can make that sort of lighter. I could also make it darker. It really just depends on the look you're going for. When it comes to the chibis, you really don't need to be as pedantic about things like where your light direction is coming from because it's already kind of being interpreted. So if I do want to add a little bit of a gradient to give it a little bit of more dimension, which is something that I do like to do, I'm not going to do like the whole gradient that I would normally do for a face because a super rendered, simplified character does kind of look weird. Like, unless it's sort of like a Funko Pop style thing where rendering it, it's still a simplified form. Like it starts to look like some of those really terrible early 2000s advertising mascots where like they were super rendered 3D, but then like simplified characters, and the look of them is a little bit uncanny valley because you're not really used to things that are like super high detail being like simple shapes like squares and circles, and it is a balancing act at the end of the day. So like I might tone that down, but I think that's okay for the cheek. I just kind of wanted it to give the indication that there's like a little bit of a shine to her cheek. If I want to do even more or even tone down the amount of gradation, I don't know, I could just add like a little dot, and then that's going to indicate there's like light shining off her cheek. I don't think I want to do that. I don't like how that looks on this character. But I do like the way the cheek looks. And I really don't have to go too far with this. I can just do like a little bit on the edge of the eye, and I tend to do the outer edge because it looks more like a makeup thing for that. Cool. If I wanted to, I could go in and do the details of the horns as well. Like, I could make stripes on the horns. And I'm probably going to do that, but I'll do that on the line art. Because I've already made the decision that I'm doing these straps, which means that, like, this is a heavy detail chibi. Again, like, the amount that you're going to simplify is somewhat dependent on what you want at the end of the day. You can have really detailed, simplified characters. So simplified does not necessarily mean less detail. It just means, like, less realistic detail. So she's got a lot of detail. She's got a lot of straps, a lot of buckles, a lot of belt things. So we can do as many buckles as we want, but we don't necessarily need to make them realistic to how an actual buckle would work, or, like, how the light would reflect off of a buckle, etc., etc., all of the fun things that one needs to account for. Okay, so I'm making her hair gray and not black because, firstly, if you look at the hair in this model, by the way, I really like using references of, like, resin printed models rather than of the actual characters themselves. The reason is with the actual characters themselves, like in-game, the lighting is going to look different. Like, in-game lighting is so different than, like, actual realistic lighting. So I like these resin models because they kind of show more what the actual lighting of the character looks like in a more realistic situation. So I prefer that. Now here, what I'm going to do to make it look like it's not just a gray hair thing is I'm going to select all of the gray. Again, I'm in my color layer, so this is actually what I'm selecting. And I am going to just use a hard brush with a bit of a gradient to kind of add in the depth and the shadows. So this is now what's going to make this appear black, even though it's not exactly black. And I will do some blending as well. Whether you do this with a gradient or you do it with sort of a hard edge is also up to your style. If you want it to look more stylized, then a harder edge is going to give you that. I like the softer edge. I feel like it does provide a bit more ambience to the look of the character's hair. Like, I might be totally wrong about that, but that is just a preference thing. And, like, chibi, like, you get different chibis, like the ones that I have made and, like, got better at making over the years. I'm just going to turn on my lock so that I don't accidentally paint outside my lines. Yeah, over the years, as I've done more and more chibi characters, I have realized that kind of a mixture of the two, of, like, the hard shading and the soft shading, gives me a really pretty result. And that's what I'm generally going for. But if you're going for something that is simple and, like, quickly reproducible, then there's no point in doing the gradients. In fact, they're just going to get in the way because gradients take a while and you need to kind of think about where to place them. Whereas if you are creating, like, let's say a PowerPoint presentation and you need to do chibis for the infographic, like, that doesn't really make sense. You can also obviously, like, AI generate, like, lots of infographic things, but, like, I don't know, my personal opinion, like, I've got lots of opinions regarding the AI generated stuff and how it looks, but, like, they tend to look really weird and gross, in my opinion. Like, the really simplified ones you can get away with, but whenever you're trying to do more, like, artistic style chibis, like when I was looking for references for chibi poses and Google just kept giving me AI generated slop as poses, it was really clear which ones had actually been designed versus which ones had been AI generated, because the AI generated ones were just, like, really weird. Like, they were just, like, the very basis of a chibi, but also, like, if you're looking for, let's say, a dynamic pose, it doesn't do that really well. It can't really give you, like, a dynamic chibi because what it thinks chibis are, firstly, it thinks it's just anime, because if I Google, like, chibi, it'll just give me anime girls, and I'm like, but chibi is a specific style within anime. And then like a couple of the images will be chibi, like actual chibis. But like, yeah, I struggle to find chibi poses. Just for like inspiration purposes. I generally will figure out my own poses in the end, but like sometimes when you're first starting and you're like, okay, but like what is an excited pose? What does it mean to look excited with your body? At that point, it's nice to have a little bit of a reference. So yeah, not to rant for 5,000 years about AI chibis looking kind of terrible, but yeah, they do. Okay, I am trying to kind of create these divisions in her hair by using a darker gray. And here is where I will probably need to come to a decision as to whether or not I want to keep the lines that I'm using as very hard, very rigid lines, or I want to kind of make it less. AI generated characters always have the same face. That's true, and I think you're right that like AI is being fed more AI as reference for AI to grow, which is kind of a problem because like if you make a copy of a copy of a copy, you're going to end up with something super fucked up looking at some point. And that is just like, I feel like that's what's happening. My main gripe is just that like search engines feel like they've gotten worse. Like anytime I'm searching for images and I search for a specific image, I will not get anything even remotely adjacent to what I searched for. I'll get like 5 million variations of a prompt for that search. But it's like, I asked for one really simple thing, like, just give me everything that's labeled as that thing. But that's not really how the algorithm works anymore, so it just gives me whatever it thinks is close to that thing. And I feel like I used to look through, like, 300 pages of stuff and finding stuff that's like, okay, that's not exactly what I wanted, but like it's close enough. Now I'll search something and it'll be like, okay, here's 5 pictures. Are any of these what you were looking for? And I'm like, no, thank you. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just being a curmudgeon. I feel like I have a lot of grievances. None of which, by the way, are like the typical, I think, grievances with artists and AI. Like, I mean, obviously all the, like, the theft and the fact that it is incredibly unsustainable, like, the way that they actually do the generation is unsustainable and requires a hell of a lot of water. Like, those issues aside, I feel like my gripes are more with, like, the fact that it doesn't operate in the way that I would feel like would be helpful as a tool. It operates in a completely different way that kind of just, yeah, produces slop and nonsense, in my opinion. Yeah, that's the other thing is like the AI art outnumbering the legitimate art, which means that like it's looking at that and it's producing more of that, and it's like, okay, but I can't find any of the legitimate art anymore. It's just the slop. Yeah. It's somewhat depressing. It's more than somewhat depressing. Anyway, I'm just going to continue doing what I've always done and enjoy my life and try not to think about it because, I mean, I think with most things, that's just the case. Like, it's very difficult to kind of come to terms with this and what it means and all that and yada, yada, yada. Okay, cool. So I'm at the point now where I have enough of the colors in the places that I want it to be that I'm getting the impression of, like, shiny hair, at least in these areas. With the Chibs, I do like sort of shinier hair, even if the character's hair isn't inherently shiny. Like, if they have braids, they're going to have shiny braids. Again, it's just, like, sort of the stylized aesthetic of them being kind of cutesy and decorative more than, like, super realistic or super, I don't know what you would call it, super well-defined. So, like, yeah, I'll give, like, little shines. Ooh, I shouldn't have done that because actually now that I look at the reference, this is also why, look at your reference, she's got stripes in her hair, and I didn't notice that before. So she's got, like, these red They're actually brown, but again, I'm exaggerating, so I'm going to make that brown red. So, like, I'm going to give some red stripes in this. If I want to be really, really precious about it, I can actually just select the areas before I add in the red that I want to do. And like, this is just a very slow selection. I will clean it up when I get into it. But this method means that I don't have to go back and fix any of these shadows. Because if I now just filled this with red, those shadows would disappear. Like, it would just be a solid red. And I kind of want to be lazy, so I don't want to do that. Oops, that selection was way out of bounds. So I'm just going to select sort of close to where I want to get these stripes. I'm also just kind of making up where these stripes are. On the actual character, they are definitely more uniform. Here I am going to just make them wherever I feel like they fit. And at the moment, I'm using the lasso selection tool, and I have addition selected as the method I'm using. So like at the very top of my screen, because I know you guys can't see my cursor, there's like a square, and there's a square and another square, and there's a square with a square taken out of it. Those are just indicating the modes of the selection. So I've got like a subtraction mode, an add mode, a select without mode. The add mode just allows me to make multiple selections, and it doesn't take away from any of the selections as I've made them. Okay, cool. So there is my hair selected. Now there's a couple ways I could do this. So I'll show you the first way. So the first way that I could do this is I can just go with my brush tool. I can make it a gradient rather than a solid line. And I can maybe use one of my modes. So underneath my modes table, I've got normal, dissolve, behind, clear, darken, multiply. I'm going to use overlay, which is probably not going to work very well because this is going on to black. Oh, actually, no, that's not too bad. And I can then add the color, and because it's on overlay, it is going to be an overlay. So it will preserve a lot of the underlying color with it. If I want to get more red, I'll just go over those lines again. I'm also going to hit Control H, so that's going to get rid of the marching ants, which are those dotted lines. And then I can see what this looks like a lot better with the selection. So that worked pretty well. I'm happy with that. I could have also like adjusted the color directly, but like that's going to take more time. The one thing is that I did not select this very well. So now I have this red line that's showing through, but it's also very obvious that's what it is, so I can quickly just repaint that. Cool. So there we have the hair, and now that I have those details, I can go in and start adding in like the little specular highlights. Just making sure that I've selected my correct brush and that I deselect, because if you don't deselect, especially if you've turned off the marching ants so you can't see what's going on, if you don't deselect, then you're going to be pressing and wondering why it's not actually putting down the paint, and that's just because it's selected. We can see the it. The it of what? Cool. I'm going to turn on my masking tool again. That way I don't need to worry about drawing outside of the hair or what I've already drawn. We'll be able to... Oops. Sorry, sometimes I have to refresh my other screen because it goes dark, and then I end up hearing my own voice because spacebar will also make the YouTube video play. Okay, cool. So that looks okay. Obviously, if I zoom closer, I can find little areas that still need some cleanup. Oh, you can see the cursor. Oh, okay. So it's just the UI elements then that I guess display capture doesn't show. Right, because there's so much lag. Like, I said that like 5 minutes ago. So you're responding to things that I said quite a while ago. I think as well because I am streaming this to 2 different platforms, and they're pretty chunky, bandwidth consumptive platforms, there is going to be more lag than if I was just streaming to Twitch or just streaming to wherever. Like, Instagram wasn't a bad in terms of bandwidth, but, like, yeah, everything else just made it so not worth it. Okay, so I'm just going to move over so that I can see better how this is looking. Great. Okay, so now we come to areas like this where on the original, that's just shaved hair. So this, there's a couple of ways that you can communicate this. With Karlach, it's actually pretty easy. I can just fill that up with like a darker color that's closer to the hair, and that will communicate fine that it's shaved, because it's not shaved all the way down to the skull. But if she had a closer shave where we could kind of see the color of her skin underneath it, then we'd need to kind of try and communicate that. Normally I would do that by taking the skin color and just very lightly at a lower opacity. So like I'm going to turn my opacity all the way down to like 30 or something. At a lower opacity, I would literally just paint over the hair color. And then just do that until it looked more like a closer shave. But that's also entirely subjective and up to whoever is painting it and what they want as the final look. But yeah, there are some areas where I can see the canvas underneath, so like these areas just need to be painted. I just need to turn back up my opacity, otherwise my brush is not going to fill those areas the way that I think it will. And you're going to find that around your line art most. And like you won't be able to fill in all of them. Just do your best, because at the end I'll show you how you can try and account for those missing areas and just make sure that it's going to be a solid chibi character with solid color. And if like you are giving it to someone and they're going to be using it as a profile, so they want to like cut the chibi out of the background, then it'll make it much easier for them to do stuff like that. Like here as well, I see that this is not a straight line, and that bothers me. There we go. Like at the end of the day, this isn't a super precise art form, so like I think I might have just made a little dot in the corner. Yes, I did. So like however much detail you want is however much detail you will have. Okay, that's on the line art layer. Just be aware that like time versus detail. If you are on a deadline, you don't really have a lot of time to be wasting like fixing the individual spikes of her hair, especially if that's not something that's going to be seen from where we're seeing the full character. Cool. Gonna add another like dot there. Might actually want to make this look less radiated, just for the sake of simplification. And what's nice, and I know I've said this a billion times, but what is nice about like a digital medium versus a physical medium is you don't need as much planning. You really can work on things in real time. If you make a decision at one point during the drawing process and decide later that you actually don't like how it looks, changing it or adjusting it is not incredibly difficult. Whereas if you are like physically painting something and you want to change the design, it's not necessarily going to be as easy to do. So I just want to add some shading to her horns, because I see that they actually also gradiate from like this darker color into this color. I can also add some shadow for where her hair starts to cover the horn. And I think I did say I'm probably going to add more details to her horn, which I definitely am. But I will add those in the line art layer. So if I look at her horn, there's kind of a curved line which does also make the horn appear more flat than like a conical shape. So I'm going to use black just because all the line art at the moment is black, but that is going to change. I don't need to have that selected, and I'm just going to kind of create much more organically and also with a lot more space between them, just like the impression of that line. I just need to watch out for this break in the horn because I don't want to draw over it. If at any time you feel like you're struggling to see what you're doing, or you are struggling to like get a line precise enough, that might be a good time to zoom in. So it sounds fairly obvious, but surprisingly it's not, especially if you're like working on something for a long time. You start to become a little bit complacent. It's not really the word. You start to forget that like you're viewing it from a certain distance and a certain perspective, and when that happens, you end up not doing things to make your life easier, like zooming in, and then you only notice at the very end that, oh wait, I've made a bunch of like issues here that need to be fixed. Even worse, if your client comes to you and is like, by the way, like this is really messy and like you need to fix it and like make the lines look better. And like all of those problems are just like you not being close enough to the screen to see it. So that's why actually I like having the navigator, because that means that I can work very close up, but in the navigator I can see what is happening on my screen. Okay, and Karlach's horns curl around quite a bit, so I am kind of just drawing the up part, but on the down part, those lines are going to be different. Okay. If I want to, I can put more into the crack, so I could like put like jagged edges and things. I don't really want to do that. It's not really necessary, I think, for a chibi, because you understand that this is a crack. You understand that this is a break, and that's the main thing, is that you understand what is being communicated to you visually. What I will do is make sure that I'm in my color layer, and this is going to happen. You are going to accidentally paint color into your line art layer. That's again why I made a copy of my line art layer at the very beginning, because if that does happen, when that does happen, it makes it a lot easier. And I don't know if this little gap, that is going to be a problem. So I'm just going to fill that in before I start filling this with my bucket tool. That will also be a problem. That will also be a problem. I think I've dealt with all the problems, so if I now fill that in with my bucket tool, I am getting good coverage. So there's some things like these ends of these curls where I do want to do it by hand. I don't want to use my bucket tool because the bucket tool is not going to fill in all the way to the end. So I am just making sure that I get the precision that I want. Like little curls like that, it does struggle with a lot. So I tend not to do that. And I'm noticing as well, like she's got some things in her hair. I'm assuming those are like little metal bits and bobs. And also again, we have that red that is in there. So I'm going to select that piece of the hair. I think I've made a little bit of hair here as well, either that or that's a strap. So again, like not knowing, is this hair, is it a strap? That's pretty normal. It doesn't really matter that much. And I'm just going to use a selection method that's going to select from the inverse of what's already selected. So in my selection tools, I'm going to go to this one at the very end. So that's, I believe, the inverse selection. And what that will allow me to do is it will allow me to select within what I've already selected and add selection there. Now, unfortunately, if I wanted to do multiple selections, that's not going to work. So I then need to go back to my additional selection and go from there. And I should be much closer than what I am because I will not be able to actually see what I'm selecting unless I get closer. So let's get closer. Okay. So that is selected. I'm not going to put as much detail, I'm not going to add as many of the red stripes to this part of the hair because it's not a very visible layer of hair. It's not a very visible part of the hair. So again, I just want to get sort of the impression of the character, how they look, etc. So about that much I think is good. It's also nice to actually keep track of your palette. So like what I should have done when I initially did her hair this way was I should have actually made a layer for the palette and saved that color into that layer in case I had to use it again. I mean, like everything is very shoulda, woulda, didn't. In this case, it's not the end of the world. Like, I remembered kind of which color it was. But for people who have a bit more inclination for pre-planning and planning ahead, what you can do to kind of make your life a little bit easier is you can create another layer. You can call it palette or colors or whatever. And then you literally just draw, make sure it's on normal mode, draw that color into that. That way you have a quick return to with your eyedropper tool for any of these colors if you're going to use them again. Is this in the palette layer or is this in the, that's on the drawing. So I've accidentally made a little bit of a dot there, but it's fine, we will fix it. And yeah, this just saves a little bit of time, especially if you're going to be reusing a lot of colors. Like just from the beginning, putting your colors into a palette is helpful. Right. So now that little dot, which layer are you on? You're on the color layer, which isn't that bad. So just grab that. What's also kind of a thing with the palette though is that if you're going to add a palette, like your character that exists is also kind of already a palette. So it is sort of a like a thing of like, well, the palette's already there in the character. But yeah, this is a clearer palette. Sometimes like a really tiny area of a very specific color that you want. And that helps. Right. Gonna grab this darker color. Generally, with all characters, when I'm drawing them, I like to separate the body from the head at some point. Normally it's at the beginning. With Chibis, it's only ever in the color layer. And it's only ever when I kind of finish the head. I know I haven't finished her horn up here. Don't worry, I'll get to that. But right now, ADHD is dictating that we're doing the body. So I'm just going to use sort of the darker red to outline her body a bit more succinctly. And yes, I am going to have to come back and clean up everywhere where I have overlap. That's fine. I mean, with all of the straps on this character, that was going to be the case anyway. But what is helpful to me is because I've now done the body underneath the color layer, underneath the existing color layer, it means that the cleanup isn't going to affect anything I've done with the head. So this is kind of more towards non-destructive editing and coloring. For anyone who's wondering what I mean every time I say non-destructive versus destructive, basically just means like how much extra work you're gonna have to do because of choices that you've made on how you've set up your stuff. So in my case, because I have a color and a line art layer, it means that anything that I do wrong on either layer does not affect the other layer, and I can manipulate both layers separately in a way that is not going to mean that I have to redraw something. So like the most destructive you could be is to keep everything on one layer and color it in on one layer. Not necessarily. So again, with the straps, to answer your question, Raf, or your comment about it's going to be a lot of coloring around the straps. Because the straps are kind of one thing, like it's more or less one thing, the only coloring around I'm going to have to do are like in these little squares. So like there's a lot of straps, but thankfully most of them are over each other and there's not like a lot of spaces between them. So with that, I should be able to get away with coloring into them. But yeah, it's not the best. You're not wrong. Like it's a lot of straps. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening. That's unavoidable. But we make do. Also, once I get this skin tone in, it will make selecting the skin tone a lot easier, which will also help with that. So in this case, I'm coloring around. And anywhere where you see there's like a big area that's going to be filled with one color, just use your paint bucket tool. Like, if the paint bucket tool can make your life easier, use it. Like, it's not always going to be the answer to the question, but a lot of the times it is. Okay, so there. So I'm going to keep this, I'm going to keep this as like one long strap because I feel like that communicates more of what the outfit looks like than if I were to make it like a bunch of different ones. Because there's a lot less straps on this chibi than there are on the actual character. I mean, like, for the actual character, when I was drawing this, I actually found a cosplay manual guide. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a thing specifically for cosplayers. And the idea, I think, was that if you are making this costume, you obviously need to know exactly which straps go where and how they fit. So they'd colored in every individual strap on the 3D model to show where things would be. And I feel like it's a super helpful thing for cosplayers to use. I've never made a cosplay outfit. Like, I've made, like, components of a cosplay outfit, but I've never made, like, a full cosplay outfit myself. So I can only imagine the sorts of nonsense one would have to go through to actually figure out something this complex as a costume design. What I'm also going to do, because I think this was me forgetting what I was doing, I meant to put in these cross stitches, because like you see here, she's got cross stitches, and actually they're actually cross stitches on the other side. It's just that from a distance they kind of looked like single stitches. So I will fix that in the design on the line art, and I can do that really easily because again, it's not they're not one layer. So I can just make these into crosses. I don't need to make all 54 or however many there are. I just need to make a couple to get the idea across. Ha ha ha. And I'm trying to be really careful not to have overlap here. Oh man, I would not want to have to wing this as a costume. I mean, I suppose if you have enough belts, anything is possible, right? But yeah, there we go. So that is essentially her skin in the costume done. With the costume itself, we're going to use the same coloring technique. So I'm going to grab sort of a mid-tone here. This one I can do either in my color layer, or I could do, stayed for the puns, yay. Or I could do in the under art layer. Doesn't really matter at this point because none of this is going to interfere with the head, and we're going to paint over it anyway. Some of it might interfere with the hair, so I'm just going to keep it in the under color layer. fact, I'm going to call this underlay. It doesn't actually matter what you call these things as long as you remember what you have named stuff. Oh, also, I didn't do the hands. That is something that I'm going to want to paint in before I start coloring the clothes. Because otherwise I'm going to assume that the hands are part of the clothes, because especially when you're zoomed in this close, what is a hand and what is a line are two very different things. So we can just do that. Cool. And then I'm just going to clean up those lines a little bit. Great. So we've got the hand. And with the outfit, so this is a lot of gray and brown. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find a gray that isn't going to disappear into the line art too much, but also isn't going to be too light that it just kind of looks like something else. We are going to need to add some additional things to this to make it clear that this is leather, but we'll get there when we get there. And I'm literally just kind of filling in everything. Like this method that I'm doing now, it works, and it does make for more precision, because I can be very precise about like where the outfit is versus where skin is versus where a buckle is. But if you are really, really struggling to just get the correct precision, or you're just lazy, you could use your selection tool to kind of select out all of these areas. That might actually take more time though, so like for me this works. And it doesn't really matter that we're going to be going behind the lines. What works, works. You could also get rid of your line art layer, and this is a lot easier to actually see what you're doing. So here, just making sure smoothing is all the way down, I can literally just come in and start filling these parts in. This is a bit more risky though. Like, it's quicker, but it's a lot more risky, because if I accidentally go over a skin line, I'm not going to see that. And it's only when I put my line art back that I can see, oh no, like see here, I've gone over a skin line. And then I have to fix that. So I really prefer the more tentative, but also, there's another skin line that I went over. It's more tentative, but it just also means that I have more control over what I'm doing. So I've got there. Right now, I am not worrying about these little loops in her outfit. Those will be drawn over or colored over in the above color art layer. Because if I try and worry about them now, that is going to waste so much time. And I'm speaking from experience here of like trying to get between these individual loops in the worst way possible. It's just not fun. But it does actually remind me, for anyone who cares, what you could do from the beginning is you could fill your entire chibi color layer with gray. So basically, the silhouette of your chibi just entirely gray. That does help sometimes when it comes to doing little details like this, because it means that you could have just gone to the color layer and filled whatever was there with the gray. But because I don't have that, I just have the line art and I'm making the color art from that, I am kind of limited in that I can't just take a color. Yeah, so literally now, like, I think there's a bit of a delay, but like I've just mentioned the thing that you're now mentioning. But yeah, you could just make the color layer and do that. That's totally, like, that is a much more smart way of doing this. I forgot to do that, so we're just going for it. But yeah, that would actually make a lot more sense, and it would have saved some time here, because then you could have just like filled it in. But at the end of the day, you know, whatever works. Okay, so I'm just filling in the bracers here. The hand I'll come back for. Cool. Yeah, unfortunately, there's no avoiding some amount of annoyance work at some point of anything with this many straps. Like, we are going to be painting these straps for a while. But in some cases, that's also okay, because it's not like we're doing this for someone specific. And I don't have a time deadline on this. I'm only creating these chibis to advertise my chibi character commissions, which also advertising subtly, not subtly. I'm doing discount chibi character commissions. Feel free to DM on Discord. The information is in the description. Okay. And then the final bit of boot here. And what I think is a buckle of some sort. Yes, it is a buckle of some sort. There we go. Okay. So what is also really nice about these simplified characters versus the more rendered ones is... Oh, wait, I'm in the wrong color layer. Remember to stay hydrated. Thank you. I have water. Water exists in the world, and I have some. Lucky me. Yeah, so the inevitable thing has happened where I've drawn into the wrong layer, but it's fine, because these layers are going to get merged into each other at some point anyway. But now, what I want is I want to be able to select the skin color, and I want to be able to select it separately from the other colors. Because this is a simplified character and it's all one solid color, the selection process is way easier than if the character had gradients, like in our reference. So in our reference, I couldn't just select similar because there's a lot of similar colors. So it would either over-select what I wanted or it would not select entirely what I wanted. So in this case, it makes my life so much easier because I can just select similar. It selects the entire giant group of color, and I can use that selection to fix... Okay, so this is now in a different layer, so I need to go back and fix that. And I can use that to just paint in my highlights. Cool. So generally I actually do want most of the body to be this mid-tone rather than the shadow color. Like, the shadow color is only really going to come through where the head and the body meet. So like there's going to be a large shadow. And like things like under the armpits. Whoops. Why did I do that? Yeah, things like under the armpits as well. We're going to see shadow in those areas. But the other areas, like, unless you really want to get in the details of those straps, those other areas can be mostly the normal skin tone. Again, with this simplified sort of character, I'm not that bothered by where the light is and whether it's accurate. It's just kind of like left to right, and is this reading as an arm that is over a bicep or whatever. Also, I am intending to do a longer stream today than I normally do. So I normally do about 2 hours. This one I'm probably gonna go until about 4 o'clock my time, so Central African time, which means that it's gonna be going for a while. And I am probably gonna take a break. In fact, I'm probably gonna take a break now, like for water, because yes, it was mentioned. But before then, I just want to hide my marching ants just to see if this is looking the way I want it to. And yeah, more or less is. Maybe I can make some of these smaller areas the darker color just to add some pizzazz. And there as well. And I just want to also get rid of this because that was an accident. Cool. Also, again, and I will always remind everyone of this until the end of time because it will always be something that you will regret until the end of time, but make sure that you do have autosave set up. If you do not have autosave set up, then you need to be saving every couple of minutes, which if you don't remember to do and the power goes out, that's not a good time. But right, I am gonna take a quick 5-minute break for water and then be right back. Right, back now. Creation, this is the cessation crustacean. I don't know what that means, but yes, it is a crustacean. So I'm fully hydrated, and I also got myself some candy. So we had Halloween a few days ago for anyone who celebrates Halloween. And I was doing a market, and we were given candy by the market creators to give to the kids. And I don't know where they got this candy, because it's like weird candy that I've never heard of before. Like there's one brand called Royal Chews. I have never heard of this brand before. And it's all like super weird flavors. Like I assume this is gum. Nope, that's not gum. What is that? I don't know. It's pink. So it's pink flavor. Ugh. But either way, back to what we were doing. Okay, so some of this is colored on that layer, some of this is colored on that layer. I'm going to merge these layers now. Keep in mind that whatever is your underlayer is going to become the name of the new layer. So I want this to be the color art layer. And I am going to just select that gray, go to select similar. It will select similar in everything within that gray color range. And with that, I can get a lighter color and kind of just add the lighter color. So I don't want this to be too obvious. So I'm using a gradiated brush as I go through. And I can add in the hard shading later. Like, I prefer doing it this way because I can kind of see better what would look nicer with hard shading. So that when I'm done, I can just grab my hard shading brush and add in the hard shading line. The same for if I want to add a harsher shadow, I will just use the darker color to get that harsher shadow. I'm going to make a little bit of shadow sort of under the boobs. Just a little bit. And this is also where if you want to start adding like details like the creases in the pants or between the straps, you can. With a character that has this many straps, I don't want to go overboard because ADHD will dictate that if I start going overboard, we're never going to leave. We're going to be here doing straps forever. So I'm rather just going to do a few. And now the straps and the boots are going to be different because there's quite a lot of brown in these. So this is also where simplifying is going to make our lives easier, because since I've simplified the straps on the boots, I don't need to worry about the individual ones. I can just go ham on these. I'm also not going to worry about the exact shape of the boots. Like this boot has like a little over lip thing and this one doesn't. Like that doesn't really matter for a chibi. Like the details in the boots really don't concern me with that. I don't know what that candy was, but it was gross. Now what I am realizing is that there's some shadow in these straps and I kind of want to keep that. So instead of doing this on normal, I'm going to do it with overlay. That way I can preserve some of that shadow. I'm just going to do multiple layers of the overlay color to get closer to the true color that I want. I don't know if this is light enough. If I look at this color, it's more of a brown. So I'm gonna come in here. Yeah, I think that's closer. Just gonna add it in as that brown. Okay, and fixing up. Now this is also an area where putting on smoothing is probably going to be beneficial to me, because it will allow me to paint more accurately around these lines. I think 62% is a bit high. Let's do 26. There we go. Yeah, some more accurate line painting. And fun fact, for anyone who might be using a tablet to do this, make sure that if you, for whatever reason, need to grab your mouse, that you do not put your tablet pen over your tablet, because since your computer will read your tablet as a mouse, if you do that, it's going to look like your mouse cursor is going crazy, and you will think that there's something wrong with your computer, which is what literally just happened to me. And I'd just like to say, for anyone here who I was going to draw your chibi in this stream, don't worry, I will still draw it in the next stream, but Karlak is taking quite a bit longer than I was suspecting. I didn't account for all these straps. It's the straps' fault. So that is definitely going to be in the next stream. I am going to probably be streaming more regularly now, because I am no longer under full-time employment. Yay, fun employed. So I'm going to be streaming probably on Saturdays and on Mondays, because those are the 2 days that I have free, where I'm not working on variouses for people. So I'm actually very curious to see, because I was told that Mondays are actually quite nice for like art streams, because a lot of people watch them during work, or instead of work. So I'd be very curious to know, like, for people who are watching this stream, like, are you currently at work? Is this sort of a nice thing to watch while doing other stuff? Or is it something that's more better consumed when it's like in tutorialized form? I'm just curious. Like, I don't plan to do anything with that information, but I would love to know just like what people enjoy about these sorts of things, because streaming in general wasn't really something that I knew about or was particularly interested in until quite recently, and my interest in it is almost entirely just like me wanting to do something in a space where I don't actually have to go outside and interact with people, which I think a lot of people can relate to. So for me, that is what I get from this sort of thing. Pretending to work, yep, cool. I am proud if I have made at least one person distracted from their day-to-day job. Okay, let's just get rid of these marching ants so that I can see if there's anything, at least from this distance, that looks off. That seems okay. I might add a little bit of a shadow there. Again, not really concerned about the accuracy of these shadows. These shadows are serving the purpose of definition, not the purpose of accuracy. And there we go. So once you've gotten to that point, I think I'm gonna do just one more level of detailing here, which is to add a little bit more of a highlight. For me, it's a nice second screen educational thingy. Okay, fair enough. I don't think I have ever been able to, like, educate myself on a second screen. Like, I need my full attention on everything to be able to actually be attentive towards it. Otherwise, I am just not absorbing any of the information. But also, I think that might be an ADHD thing and not a general person thing. Just a random thing, but I very recently found out that I am quite likely severely ADHD, and that was something that was kind of a, like, oh no shit, Sherlock, to every person that knows me, but for me it was kind of a groundbreaking, like, oh my god, my life suddenly makes sense, and every issue that I've ever had suddenly makes sense in a way that's not just like, oh, you are a problem and need to be dealt with situation. So if I refer a lot to, like, oh yeah, this is probably ADHD, it's because I'm also at the same time figuring out, like, is this ADHD or is this just kind of me being impatient? Anyway, back to the point again. With this streaming, I generally have been doing it as like a fun thing because for me it's very low stakes. Like if you're trying to like my background is in teaching and teaching like animation, so like anyone who has ever frankly been taught by another person, there is a lot of bullshitting, to be frank. There's a lot of oh yeah, this is how you do something, and just listen to me. And normally the person you're teaching is going to listen to you because they chose to be taught by you in some respect or another. So like with that, it's very easy to kind of fall into a complacency where you are just teaching people and they're like, oh yes, all of this is correct, and then later on you find out, oh wait, I taught you nonsense, you need to relearn this. And like for the subject that I was teaching, because like I have taught animation for a long time, but there was specific software that I had to teach that I did not know and I had to learn to teach, and that didn't like that required me to learn a whole software that I wasn't necessarily familiar with. So yeah, there was a lot of like bullshitting that happened with regards to that because like, I'm learning while I'm teaching. And I was always very open with the students that like, hey, I am learning this while I'm teaching you. So like if I mess something up or I say something and you are aware that there's a better way to do something, let me know, please. Whereas I feel like streaming is even less stakes than that because like it's not like any of you are going to go out and buy a 10-year course to making chibis now because I showed you how to make a chibi once. I would hope that you don't do that. Please don't do that. So like this is just kind of like fun and like me sharing my experiences and what I've learned from doing this professionally, in the sense that I have made money from selling chibis to people. Therefore it is a profession. But not in the sense of like I am in any way more knowledgeable about like best practices or whatever. In fact, I can assure you I am not. Like my Photoshop setup is a nightmare at the best of times. But yeah, like, again, gone off into the weeds. No idea what I was talking about. It's fun. This is a fun thing that I enjoy doing, and I enjoy like talking to people. I will say I think I enjoy talking to people that more than I enjoy talking with people. And that has been something quite useful for me in my life thus far. So if I can do it in sort of a relaxing way and other people enjoy it, then I'm happy. So I'm just adding those like additional belts and things. Now, I am missing that line, but why am I missing that line? I should not be missing that line because, unless, of course, I have accidentally drawn this over something. Nope, so why am I missing that line? What's going on here? Lines, you're not locked off. Every now and then you will encounter an issue and you will be entirely unsure whose fault this issue is. Is it my software? Is it me? I don't think it's me. But why will you not draw that line? Now you're drawing that line. Weird. Entirely weird. I'm assuming actually that it was me. So I think that was, I had a selection probably. And I forgot that I had a selection. And then I just drew lines even though the selection was there. That's why when I select things, so if I select anything, if I turn off the marching ant, so if I go Control H on my keyboard, that selection is still there. So if I draw stuff, it'll draw, but only within that selection. And turning off the marching ants is a dangerous thing because I will forget 5 seconds after I've turned it off that it is off. And I'm fairly certain that's just what happened. That's what just happened. Words. What even are? Yep, layer lasagna. My favorite. Cool. I think I know what I just said about, like, the belts and, like, not adding more belts, but I feel like I have to add at least one more belt here. Rather, I need to add one more belt buckle. Just because. Just because I want to. Okay, cool. Also, these, I am not entirely sure yet how I'm going to communicate what these are. They seem to be somewhat, yeah, they are. They're just sort of more elaborate belt buckles. And I imagine that they are more decorative than anything else, which means that I don't necessarily want to make them too overly detailed. With stuff like this, because it needs to go on top, right? Unless you've planned for it to be there from the beginning. Stuff like this, I tend to just kind of keep in the back of my mind as, oh yeah, you're probably going to need to draw a couple of those at some point. And I just add them to my line art. And then, from my line art, so this is where I said, like, I will mess up my line art and mess with my line art. With a higher smoothing, I literally just go in and kind of draw these over. And I probably could also create another layer over the line art and then draw it in there. But, yep. That's my excuse, is yep. These are like crests of some kind. It's really interesting. And also made me realize that I really want to play more Silk Song. I've been playing, and then I had to stop for a little bit because of reasons. I mean, those reasons were mainly that my controller, which I have had for, I guess it would be like nearly 6 years now. Like, it was sort of a controller that I, in inverted quotes, borrowed from my university. And then, those are actually soul coins strapped to the belt. Oh, what are those? Please understand, I am not playing Baldur's Gate myself. I am occasionally looking at my partner playing it and advising him on who to have relationships with in the game. So my understanding of the individual narrative is somewhat lacking. So please, do tell me. I am very curious to know. I've also forgotten what I was talking about 5 seconds ago. stuff and things and belts. And here, I think I want this to be gray instead. Alrighty, so simplified the look of that quite a lot. It's a currency in hell, literally souls and coins. Karlach uses them to power her infernal engine that replaced her heart. Oh, very fun. Speaking of, and thank you for reminding me about her heart. So that is something that, because it's so specific to the character, I definitely want to add into this design. Oh yes, I was talking about Silksong. Thank you, Kimmy. I can continue talking about Silksong after I am done talking about this, because it's actually to do with what I'm talking about. Because it's so specific to her design, it is something that I want to incorporate somehow into this. So I think I have a second reference, which I might have turned off, or I might have deleted at the beginning for reasons that, frankly, only God knows at this point. Okay, that's my face reference. That's, oh, this is the like cosplay strap reference. Yeah, I deleted that at some point, but that's fine. I'm just gonna look it up on my phone. So, I want to add in that sort of detail because it's so specific to this character. Yep, basically D&D Tony Stark. And because of that, it's kind of like, it's something that's like, you know, if you see that, you recognize it as the character. With Chibis, it's so important to make sure that the small details of the character, like the things that people know about them, come through. So I also am going to put those little vents on their shoulders. I forgot to draw those because, again, with all the straps, things were going to get left behind. And the way that I'm going to do that is using color dodge, which is as fancy as it sounds. So I've used color dodge quite a lot in my more rendered pieces because it's really just a powerful tool for just immediate gratification with very little effort. Essentially what it does is it creates a dodge, which is a camera photography term, if I'm not mistaken. I might be. But it kind of creates the effect of like light around an area. And if you use it correctly with like something that has some opacity, like a brush that has some opacity, you can get some really, really awesome looking things using color dodge. So I'm going to use color dodge on her chest just to create the impression of the engine that is in her chest. And something that I definitely should have done was make sure that I was drawing in the correct layer. Yes, I'm in the correct layer, thank God. And then we have the idea of it. Now, obviously, because she's a chibi, her chest is way smaller than that. Like, I have intentionally made this way bigger than it would be, but that kind of, I think, adds to the aesthetic. And then, as I said, I also need to just make sure that I give her the vents in her arms. So she has a specific number of these vents, and they are in a specific pattern. I don't think I necessarily need to make that exactly accurate. So I'm just going to make like 3 vents on the side. I can maybe get away with 2 if I look at the reference image that I'm using here. Zoom. For some reason my trackpad zoom wasn't working. I can also see there's lots of areas here I need to clean up. Yeah, so yeah, I think I can get away with 2. Because at the end of the day, it's like, you know who this character is, you know what their deal is, or you presume that whoever is looking at this knows. So, don't necessarily need to be fully accurate. And I am on the line art layer right now. So I will just draw in those vents. And here as well. What you're also going to find is because this is simplified to the space, like the amount of room you have for things becomes less. So I don't actually have a lot of room to draw the full vents because firstly the vents are bigger because they are a defining feature of the character, so I'm giving them a larger look than I would normally. But that also means they're not going to fit as nicely. So I do have to make concessions both with how many I draw, how big I draw. Yeah, I need to make concessions with that. I'm also going to do this on the line art layer because I want them to be visible and I don't want the lines to be that thick. Yeah, my method of doing things can be considered pretty destructive, frankly. Just in terms of, like, general artistic layouts and things. Like, it took me so long to just kind of force myself to separate my layers appropriately. Like, I think everyone has something that they're sort of like, I could do this in the easier way, but I am choosing to do it in the way that is way more effort at the end of the day because doing it the easier way in the moment feels like more effort. And if that is the case, then, you know, it is the case. But you do eventually need to make concessions. Creative vortex of chaos, everyone has their own method. That's also true. Like, when you're actually doing something, especially if there's a degree to which you're kind of turning off your brain as you're doing it, you're not really thinking about, like, okay, but what's gonna happen 5 minutes into this? You're just doing it. Like, what happens 5 minutes into this is future me's problem. Okay, so I don't actually know what's happening at the center of these vents. Like, that image is quite pixelated. Do I have a better image of her shoulders, and or can I find a better image of her shoulders? Karlak shoulders. I'm sure someone somewhere is looking at that, but not for the reasons that are acceptable. Okay, so it's like, yeah, so they're literally holes, so there's like vents in there. Now, there is also the aspect that this character is severely burned, and that is something that I want to get the idea of. Again, like, this is just such a complex character. Like, Chibiingifying it and making the decision, like, me making the decision because I've made that decision, it's too late to go back now, to commit to all of these smaller details, is now going to be something that's, like, determines the rest of this piece for however long is left. I mean, I think I said I would stop at 4. That's not happening. We're going until this is done. I was gonna get takeout today anyway. Also, Control Z is your friend. Anytime you draw something and then you need to continue, just Control Z. And yeah, we still haven't done that horn. Or the axe, but, like, shh. Okay, I've put the sketch for the axe there so that at least I won't forget to do it, which I would definitely do had I continued on. Okay, so we've got the glowy glows, we've got the vents. Right, the severe burns. Let's talk about those. So how are we going to do those? So I'm thinking, because of the simplified nature of this, don't need to make anything that looks textural, don't need to make anything that requires line art. All I'm going to do is just add some of that burned skin texture in the form of a slightly lighter red. So we're kind of going to go with the structure of the burns themselves. It's also why I really like the references when it's on a model, because it's a small figure and it's been photographed really close up, it means that the amount of details that you're able to see is more than if it was actually like a life-sized person. I might be completely wrong about that, or I'm hallucinating, but I feel like every time I have used a reference that is like a cosplayer for a character or is an actual person, there is something that is like a really obvious detail about that person that I miss. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do this on a different layer because I do want the option to change this or to completely delete it if I fuck up. So I'm literally just drawing these in as like little swirls. So this would probably end up looking like a tattoo or something for someone who wasn't aware of what its purpose is. And that's actually okay. It doesn't necessarily need to, maybe not a curl that's that curly. It doesn't necessarily need to look like the thing because like burns are a pretty graphic thing. Like the way that you show them in anime, I think in like manga for a long time, the sort of shorthand for a burn was like a little sort of jagged edged marking of a different color. And like that was enough. With this character, I feel like this will be enough, more because of the character's recognizability, more than because I feel like this is how I would do it. Like this is how I would do sort of the tree-like texture on something like I can't remember the name of them now, but in D&D, the characters who are essentially made out of bark and they are tree people. What are they called? Dryads, thank you. So like, yeah, this is how I would kind of give the indication that a character had sort of dryad bark skin, would be to add lines like this. In this case, it's indicating that the skin texture is not smooth, which could really mean anything, but hopefully communicates what I'm trying to communicate here. And yeah, she's also gotten her ribs. It's like a full, it's everywhere that the engine is happening. I'm not masking this out, not for any good reason, just because I'm not masking it out. Again, we're in it. We're in the soup. We're doing this. It's getting done. How we get there, we'll figure that out later. I do have to say, though, this is maybe the most complicated chibi design that I have ever done. And I did this to myself, so that's on me. Yeah, okay, so looking at it from a bit of a distance, I think that that works for what I want and what I want to communicate. So we will continue down this path. I do want to put in a little bit more darkness in some of these straps. Not that dark, oh my gosh. But like, I do want to sort of highlight additional shadow areas in these straps. Again, I'm not really masking it off right now because I can now see where things are. So I will use the power of sight that I have been gifted to do that. Also, apologies if like I randomly burp or something. I've never been able to hold back my burps. They just come out and they are disgusting, and I apologize. Okay, here's where I want to be closer because I do want to make sure I don't go over too much of these teeny tiny rings. Like, at the end of the day, using a software like Photoshop, there is only so much tiny line overture you can do. As I said, it's not really made for this sort of thing. So do your best. Get as much of the details as you can, or as you want, within the context of what you want. and just do what's fun. Okay, just adding a little shadow there because I see there's a little shadow at the bottom of her spine that I put in. And I want to make sure the same shadow is present all the way down. Okay, these straps are quite a bit farther from her body, so I also do want to put a little bit of shadow underneath them just to indicate that they are actually suspended above her body somewhat. They're not just a pattern on the outfit or a texture on the outfit. You'll find with Chibs that can be difficult sometimes, like defining depth, because they're by nature they're going to be kind of flat. So defining depth with them is going to be a little bit more difficult than with like a hyper-realistic character or a character that has more there to communicate depth. It's like one of the reasons that I am so enamored with comic book artists, like manga artists, webtoon artists, comic book artists, especially those who specialize in like line art and like black and white, because if you think about it, the amount of detail and the amount of like depth that they are able to communicate with like just two colors, with just black and white in some cases, with three colors, or like with gradients of those colors, is kind of crazy. Like, I really just admire anyone who can achieve something like that. Okay, so this here, the line art is a little bit meh. So I'm gonna just clean it up a bit. Oh, I didn't actually delete that. I added a color to it. So I was trying to erase, but I ended up adding color. That's also something to just be careful of. Cool. And these tusks, I think they're tusks. They're bones of some kind. These are going to be a different color, so I will utilize my fill tool in placing these. It's not going to be entirely accurate, but I will fix it up later as I go. I'm just going to add a little thing there. Yeah, now if this was being created for like an animation or something, you really don't have the option to be as loose with like colors of underlays and overlays and such, because like they're going to be moving, so people will eventually see every single mistake at some point, unless of course you are animating in a very stylized manner where you do want it to look kind of redrawn every single time. But I definitely don't want to animate this character. I can only imagine the headache that would be. I just want to make a Chibi. And I think with the body, this is as much detail as I am willing to add. Now, there's still some things that I need to do, like these need to be brown. Right now, they are not. There needs to be some brown straps here as well. I still haven't finished her other horn, so what's the time? Yeah, I know there's time. So I'm going to get right into it. Like, I don't think I will be able to finish all of the details of this today, but I will be happy if I finish getting all of the base colors down today. Cool, so again, I will go with my overlay just to try and preserve more of this color. These are very small areas though, so I might not be able to get away with just using the overlay without also doing a selection of some sort. I think the stream that I do on Saturday, where I promise I will specifically look at, although maybe I can't look at my commissioned Chibis because I also need to get those commissions done. So I might not do those on Saturday. I would do them tomorrow, but I am already obligated to do stuff tomorrow. Okay, cool. So that seems to work fairly well. That seems to work fairly well. Got a little bit of color bleed. But then since this is more solid than the other ones, the other straps, I can get away with it. Cool. And that is a bicep. However, that's also an arm plate, so you wouldn't be able to see that through the bicep. So I can erase that line entirely. That's fine, that's fine. At the end, I am going to merge all of these together. All of these layers, the line art and color art and all of them. And I will do a final sort of sweep to just find things that I want to add or clean up or do whatever with. Sometimes, I don't think I'm going to do it with this character because I feel like there's already enough additional detail. Sometimes what I like to do is I go to the line art layer and I will lock the pixels, and instead of it just being a black line, I'm just gonna make it a darker color to the character's skin over the areas where you can see their skin. So like the ears, for example, like just make that a lighter kind of color brown to her hair. I don't always do this. I will normally do it if I feel like the character can benefit from it, because it kind of creates the look of light, I suppose. Like it kind of creates the idea that like this area of the ear is lighter than this area of her mouth. So sometimes that look is nice. Sometimes it does not make a difference whatsoever. With characters with like red skin or like green skin or blue, like non-human skin tones, I find that it does actually make a bit of a difference. Like it just makes them look a little bit more toony, in my opinion. And I like it. So, yeah. What I will say is I have done a much better job of keeping my line art from getting messed up. Like, let's see how we can actually see how messed up it's gotten. Yeah, like there's a lot of stuff in here that shouldn't be here. But it's not as messed up as it could be. Like normally my line art is like completely unusable to do something like this by the time I get there, in which case I then go to that copy of the line art that I made at the very beginning, hence why I made the copy at the very beginning. Planning ahead for fuck-ups. Okay, cool. And just put a little bit down here. I am using a soft brush, that way I can kind of control how much of a gradient comes into the line art. Like you see here, there, like some of it got into the hair. That's fine. It just makes the hair look a bit lighter in that area, which, you know, isn't necessarily a bad thing. So that's not really prescriptive either. Not that anything is. Okay, so let's tackle that horn. So it looks like on the character, the horn gets much lighter the further away from the head it is. So I am literally just going to fill that in with a lighter brown. And I need to get rid of my sketch layer because it's going to make trying to fill colors difficult. There we go. I can put it back in as soon as I actually have those colors on the character. What's layer 9? Oh, layer 9 is the burns. See, this is why you label your layers, because otherwise, who even knows what's going on? Right, unlock my line art layer, and if I look at this, yeah, it's got much more of a drastic curl, but since that's kind of hidden by her hair, you're not really going to notice that. Also, hard brush. So I'm just going to kind of go around this part of the shape. Great. Then I can come back to my color layer and grab some lighter color to just add that in. Can also grab some darker color to do the same, but on the opposite side. Being careful not to change any of the colors that I have already put down. Might be a bit too late for that. And the final thing that I'm going to do is, again, lock off my line art. And I am going to actually make the horn line a bit lighter in those lighter areas. So that's going to give the impression that the entire horn, not just the color art, is lighter the further it gets from the head. And just a little bit of extra detail. Great. So just check in every now and then with your thumbnail of your character to make sure that everything still looks the way that you want it to. In my case, I feel like the amount of detail that I've put into the body now means that the head looks kind of starkly not detailed by comparison. Like, there's still some detail to be added to her ears and stuff, but I feel like I can immediately address this issue by just adding a little bit of shadow to her face. And this is just going to be a hard shadow. I'm not going to bother with gradients or anything like that. I say as I make a gradient line, hard brush, not that color. It needs to be this color, so it's much lighter. So this is just going to give me some more definition. I can also kind of come inside the ear. That didn't get selected. I can just come inside the ear and sort of add a bit more shadow. Ears on chibis are normally way easier because normally they're just simplified down to half a circle. With characters that have large ears, elf ears, they become infinitely harder because then they are larger in proportion to the rest of the head than they would be on like a realistic character, which means there's a lot more attention that is drawn to them, which in turn means that you have to pay a lot more attention to how they look, because if they look kind of wacky, it's the first thing that anyone is going to notice. Yep, those oversized ears. So it's interesting that, like, for your sort of more humanoid chibis, the ears are going to be like infinitely easier, but then as soon as it's a non-human character, oh yes, also if your character has animal ears, that's also a thing where it's like those ears need to look fantastic. Like if you have a furry character, those ears are going to need to look great. Like with humans, we don't really pay attention to our ears that much. Other creatures are much more ear-centric. Okay. So I am at the point now No, I'm not. Never mind. Ignore me, I'm drunk. I still want to add a little bit more detailing on the boot. On both boots. And kind of going up the boots as well. Just something to remind me that that's not just a flat boot. It is a thing. Might also want to add a little bit more detail onto these straps. Wrong way. Wanted to put the detail down here. And by detail, I just mean highlight. Okie dokes, great. So at this point, what I can do is I can start merging things down. So at this point, I am now fairly certain that anything that I do to this is going to be cleanup. So because of that, I don't necessarily need these to be separate layers anymore, so I'm going to merge them down. So I'm going to merge down the burns and merge down the lines. Remember, if I realize in like an hour that that was a mistake, I still have my lines that I made at the very beginning. So that's the one bit of planning that like is actually a good bit of planning. Like all planning is good planning. Not saying it's not, but like that's the one bit of planning that in case of the worst case scenario, I have a backup. But I am thinking that this is fine. Like this needs to actually be a this needs to be gold, not just a color, but that's fine. Cool, so accurately inaccurate Karlach, almost done. I still feel like the face doesn't necessarily match with the body as much as I'd want. It's mostly because of the addition of those burns, because they do look like a textural element that one would expect to find on the face. So I'm gonna add just a smidge more gradient to the face so that it does look like a little bit more detail's been added there. And these are all things that you're only gonna find out once you've actually started adding color in the first place. Okay, I am hiding my marching ants, but they are still there. I am saying that out loud so that I remember that they are still there. And even though I said that, I immediately started trying to do something outside of the range of the marching ants. Okay. So just taking a second to look at that, I don't think that looks great, so I'm actually not going to do that. So Control Z, or if you have Control Z'd for a while, you can just go back to your history tab. The history tab is very useful, especially if you've done stuff a while ago that you just don't know how far back you've gone. It'll actually show you what movements you've just done. So in my case, I've did the magic wand for selection and then a whole lot of brush strokes. And that was where it started to look a bit meh. So I'm going to go back to before I did that and redo what I just did, but hopefully better. Let's see if now the little specular highlight is gonna do something. I think it does add something, but I think it adds something more if it's less intense. If your character has like blush or something, this is also where you can start adding blush. So you can either do that as like a very stylized sort of blush. So a stylized blush for like an anime character is just like a circle like that. And like that'll still fit here because again, it is a chibi. But if you want to do more realistic blush, you could also do that. Like you could actually shade the blush on the eyes if you wanted to. And that would work. Something else that I am reminded of is that this character has a scar. So I put the space for the scar on the eyebrow but if you wanted to, you could also just draw that like as a line. Like that's a little bit more detailed than just leaving it as sort of a split eyebrow. But it kind of does come down to the look that you want in the end, really. What I am going to try and do is fix up these scales, because the line art for these got super weird. I think because it's a very small shape. I was not zoomed in enough when I initially drew it, and I had my smoothing on too high. So the result of that was that I ended up with lines that were very thick, but also not very formulated down. Do I like the scar like that is the question. I don't think I do. I think I want to come back and fix that. There we go. Yeah, I think it looks nicer like this. Okay. And a few other things that can be done here to help myself out. The eyes themselves. So I said at the beginning that like they're very white, like very starkly white in comparison to the rest of the body. Now, in some cases, that's fine. You want that to be the case. You want the eyes to stand out. In this case, I feel like the eyes are going to stand out just on their own. They don't really need that much more help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them. I'm also going to turn my tolerance to like 50 because it's not selecting as I want it to. There we go. And I'm going to start by, if I looked at my reference, I see that... Okay, this is not going to show up very well. But if I look at the reference, it looks like she's got a red ring around her eyes. I am probably going to need to confirm that because it is a very pixelated reference. So if I look up Karlach eyes... Yeah, it's sort of red around, like it's more dark and then it becomes red, but I am going to interpret that as sort of red around the irises. So I'm going to make a dark red, and I'm just going to put that in the line art. So, like, if I'd waited to do this until before I merged, this would be easier because I could literally just draw it in. I didn't, but it's not the end of the world because this is fairly easy to cordon off. And the result is we get this red around the iris. Okay, cool. Then let's deal with this white, which is way too bright compared to the rest of the eye. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to add a bit of a shadow. And we will need to add this onto the pupil and the iris as well. But I find this helps to just make the eye less intense. You could also just make this entire color, instead of making it like a stark white, you could just make it like sort of an off gray. The thing is, when it's in this context, you're not really able to tell that it's off gray. It still looks white, but it's not as intense as it was before because now it's off gray. In fact, the whites of your eyes aren't actually white. They are translucent and a little bit reflective, which means that things in the environment will be reflected on the whites of your eyes, and or you will be able to see the veins in the whites of your eyes. But we kind of end up seeing it as white because it's sort of opaque, and like there's a lot of things going on with eyes that make them look like eyes. So I won't go into all of those things because I'm not a doctor. Right. And then I am going to add a glow effect to her eyes by using color dodge again. So just with color dodge, I'm just going to go in and add sort of the yellow. So like now the iris is the thing that seems to be very bright and in your face versus the eye itself. I am also going to add a specular, which is a little bit of a cheat because if your eyes are glowing, you're not going to have specularity in them. But because, again, it's a chibi, and we don't care about reality when it comes to chibis, I can get away with that. So specular, which will make her eyes look shiny and glowy at the same time. Amazing. And I don't want a red, I just want an orange. Yeah. I am now just going to use that to add this shadow further. It's going to take down the intensity of the eyes a little bit, which is why I'm also highlighting the area I want. Like in general, I do like having this amount of control over my chibis when I'm drawing them. Like I will go back and like add in little things like scars and glows and. Also, does she have earrings? It doesn't look like it, at least not in this image. Helpful. Okay, great. Right, so now, I haven't done the axe yet. I will get to the axe, maybe, we'll see. But the next thing that I am going to do is I am going to make it so that this chibi is one solid color. So I mentioned this at the beginning. This is now for if you are making something that's going to become a profile picture or like an emote or something to that effect. You do want to make sure that if someone selects it, their selection doesn't end up with like bits missing. With stuff this small, normally it doesn't actually show that there's bits missing, but it can happen. So I do like doing this just practically. It also means that I can add something later, which, you know, we'll talk about later. So first I'm just going to turn off my sketch. And if I make a duplicate of this, firstly, let's just rename this layer. So it's call it Carlac because it was called Carlac Color. Now it's just called Carlac. I'm going to duplicate this layer just so that we can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to, in the duplicate, so I'm not doing this to the original layer. Don't worry, the original layer is preserved. Everything's fine. No one's dying. Everything's going to be okay. If I mask off all the pixels, and let's fill it with a really easy to see color. So I'm going to just make it like blue. If I fill this, okay, as it turns out, I did a pretty decent job of coloring all the color things. But like if I zoom in, you'll be able to see like, I don't know if you guys can see that as well as I can on my screen. Maybe blue's not the best color for this. Let's try like dark red. Might be easier to see. Okay, it's slightly easier to see. It might be easier even to see if I make my background like a very light color, like yellow. Don't worry, everything will go back to where it was. Yeah, now you can see. So you see how there's all of these missing chunks between all of my lines. Now, again, had I gone and done this at the beginning, like made a block at the beginning and just colored into that block, I wouldn't have this problem. But because of the way that I chose to work today, and also just like there's reasons why you might not want this, you might end up with something like this. And this might become a problem if you're making a PNG or if you're trying to make this bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this. I'm going to make this gray again because this yellow is upsetting. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select everything other than this block. You're right, this is where the line art is, but the thing is when it comes to cutting, because you know like when we've ever tried to cut some like an image from another image, you end up with like that pixelation outside of it. My goal whenever I'm doing commissions for people is to make sure that they don't have to do extra work. So I would prefer to be able to spare them having to do that nonsense. So the easiest way to do that from here is just to select the outer edge of this block. Control-Shift-I will select the inverse. So that's everything that wasn't selected. So in my case, it's my figure. You can also use like auto selection tools, and Photoshop's AI selection has gotten really good. So it's pretty decent at finding a subject in a photo without getting things too crazy and pixelated, but it does make mistakes from time to time. So in those cases, this method will help. So I'm just going to fill this block with a color that fits with my background. So In this case, that red is actually perfect because most of the colors on this chibi are this red color. So I'm going to go to the block. I'm going to make sure that my pixels are not locked off because I want to now fill this selection with this red. Okay, so now I've filled it with this red, so if I zoom in, you can no longer see those things because they're gone. I've now filled them in. This is now one solid color. And this means that if I now merge these layers on top of each other, which is what I'm going to do, merge down, now this Karlach chibi doesn't have any holes in it. So if you are selecting it or you're using it for various purposes, it makes it way easier to select. Now, I did make a little bit of a mistake, like you can see here, like the outer rim of that selection is kind of coming through. So let's just fix that quickly. I believe that that's because of the selection itself. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool. Yeah, it's because my tolerance is at 50. So tolerance is how many pixels essentially between other pixels are counted when selecting something. So if your tolerance is really low, and you select stuff, it's going to be really sensitive. So actually I think I need to make my tolerance higher. I might be wrong. I've never been able to get this to work the way that I want it to. So let's just, why are you not selecting? Yeah, I feel like tolerance lower is what I want here. But Photoshop's now yelling at me and I'm not sure why. Gah. Oh, firstly, I'm in the wrong layer. Let's get into the layer that I need to be in. And, yep. Cool. You can also make this like a neutral color, like white. Sometimes that is going to be better because you won't see like a little bit of white on the edge of a pixel as much as you'll see others. I am seeing these quite a bit, so I'm going to just select them. But also, why are you unselecting? Oh, wait, hang on. You're unselecting because... Or am I wrong? No, why are you unselecting? This is where I forget everything I've ever known about Photoshop and just start hammering stuff until it works. So let's turn on anti-aliasing. Okay, that's selected, but you're selecting the character and not... You're selecting the wrong thing. You're selecting the inverse of what I asked you to select. What's going on here? Alright, I don't know what happened just now. Something happened. Someone somewhere is doing a thing and I do not like it. 30? Will you behave at 30? More or less. Okay. Let's just cut these bits manually. Okay, sweet. And then Control-Shift-I to invert that and fill it. Whoops, forgot to select any of this. In this case, it would be minus selection because I've already inverted it. Control-Shift-I, no, Control Backspace to fill it. So now we are good. There's no more of those little colors. And if I go here, yeah, that looks a lot cleaner than what it was before. So what I am going to do is I'm going to clip Karlach's layer to that layer, which is what I should have done. That way it makes sure that if there is anything in Karlach's layer that isn't in that under block layer thing, they're at least clipped together. So the under block layer shape is going to be the shape of this chibi. And now I can merge it down. Okay, cool. And yeah, that looks fine. That looks fine. I don't see any immediate issues with that. There's still the bits that I was going to have to clean up anyway, which again, you could just not have done this from the beginning in this way, and that wouldn't have been a thing. But, you know, depends on how accurately you can just draw the silhouette of your character before you know what your character even looks like. So I'm literally just kind of cleaning up here and there with my eraser. So anywhere on the outline that I see something that should definitely not look like that, I will remove it. Like, a very, very, very thin line of red like this, that's fine. Like, that's 1 pixel in width. But that is going to help with just, like, cropping later. Now, you could also have made that block something like black, which means that anything that stands out from it would end up looking more like the line art. And that is absolutely something that works. For the sake of demonstration, I want it to not be. And then this boot has bled out quite a bit, like more so than I think makes sense. There we go. Make sure that you are on normal mode, otherwise your colors are not going to appear the way you want them to, or you think that they will, and that is a problem. Also make sure that you are using a hard brush if you are currently correcting things like your line art. And I know that this will seem like a lot of extra tedium when it's maybe not necessary to have this much extra tedium. I kind of enjoy doing the end cleanup. I find it very relaxing to kind of like search out and fix little blips here and there that don't make sense. But to each their own. And I also feel like this part actually takes less time overall sometimes than trying to plan it out perfectly from the beginning. Okay. So I knew these fingers were going to give me issues from minute 1. Well, they're actually not that bad. I do want to make the outline of the fingers red instead of black. Not that red, this red. Because I think it's better for defining sort of the look of the skin. And this is already like an absurdly overly detailed chibi. So, might as well commit to that. Okay, like tiny, tiny blips like this I don't really care about, because this was like where I initially drew more straps and then I decided I wanted less straps. Like, if you want, but like you really need to zoom in to like pixel level to be able to see these, so and she's got so much detail here anyway, your eyes are probably going to be distracted by that detail and not looking at that. I'm also not going to bother with like, okay, well I will. I said that and then I immediately was like, no, you are going to bother with that. What are you saying? I do want these bones to be bone colored. I'm not going to bother with the straps around here because these should be brown. I don't care. I don't care. Right. So there we go. We can continue adding more and more and more and more details until the end of time, frankly. And like, we will be able to get this to be the most overly detailed chibi in existence if we wanted to. But for like the base of it, this is fine, and this looks fine, and this works. I'm now going to move on to the axe, because if I don't, I am going to be that person who goes and does every single tiny detail until this thing is done, and we're already like an hour over when I said it would end. Just having a sip of water. Okay, so weapons, when it comes to chibis, are also really nice because, again, you don't really need to worry about that much detail. So I'm going to draw the axe over the main character on a separate layer because I don't want to commit to anything with the axe. It's also a pretty simple axe to begin with, so like there's not that much to worry about in that respect as it is. I'm going to swap to my polygonal selection tool. So this allows me to just create straight geometric lines fairly easily. So I will vaguely try and match the sketch. I'm not worried about the, is it called a pommel? I think maybe that's, yeah, the end of the thing is a pommel. I'm not really worried about the shape of the pommel or anything. This I am going to drastically simplify. So I'm just going to make this a straight line, and this is going to cut across her eyes, so it's going to look really weird for a second. Just bear with. Okay. I'm then going to take a darker brown, so maybe this one, change to a soft brush, maybe make the circle a little bit bigger so that I can see. By the way, if ever you're using your brush and the circle disappears, it's probably because caps lock is on. So turn off caps lock and you'll be able to see the circle. So I'm going to start at one end. It's very important that you click before you hold shift, because if you don't, Photoshop is just going to start drawing. And I'm just going to run it across. Actually, no, that's not what I'm going to do, because this is not a straight line. So I'm going to click there. I'm going to hold shift and click there. And Photoshop will connect those two lines. That's how you create kind of a diagonal line in Photoshop. Frankly, I'm not a huge fan of that as the method of doing diagonal lines. Like, I feel like every other software has found way more user-friendly ways to get you to do a diagonal line. But Photoshop is still just like the least user-friendly software known to man, so they don't care. So from here to there. Cool, that maybe is a bit too rendered with that line, so maybe I'll put it above. Yeah, that'll look a bit nicer. Cool, so that is our axe out of the way. I know the axe doesn't have line art, and that's also contributing to why it kind of looks like a very, very rendered axe compared to the rest of the character. But the way that I'm going to add in line art is going to be slightly different than how I would normally add it. But for now, for the stick, this is fine. Cool. Then I can just add on the end of it, because I don't want it to look like just a straight stick. I'm just going to add a little bloop there, just a little curve. And this too, there's 1,000,004 ways to do this that are probably more efficient and will create a more effective line. I'm just doing it the way that I am choosing to do it right now. Cool. And I'm not going to bother with like the specific shape of the axe. I just want it to look kind of like the axe. I do want it to be bigger than what I drew very vaguely in the sketch, though. I feel like that for a chibi, I want this to be kind of exaggerated. So using my pen tool, that way I can have a bit more control over the shapes of things. I'm going to draw out the shape of the axe blade. Now, Photoshop is not Illustrator. When you are using the pen tool in Photoshop, it is way dumber than the Illustrator pen tool. It does not respond the same way either. So just be aware of that. And if you need to move the individual points, you have to hold Control, because there is no white and black mouse cursor buttons in Photoshop. Okay, and then I hold Control to just move this in more. I was going to hold Control here because that needs to be a sharper edge. Alrighty. And then finish off where we started. Cool, so it's a bigger shape, and I'm also not really paying attention to like the details of like those little wings or whatever they are. This is good enough. Cool, I then go to the top where it says selection. I will make a new selection from that shape, and I will fill that with the axe color, which is gray. Don't worry, I'll add the spike in just now. So select that again because I need it, and then this lighter gray is going to be on the outside. So this is also where having smooth is probably going to be better, and I'm going to get a brush with a wider, more uniform shape because it will come around more nicely. I'm going to make my smoothing even more. And also maybe go a little bit faster. Yeah, this is what actual line art drawing is supposed to look like, is you just redrawing the line over and over and over again. I'm kind of okay not to do that. Cool. So I think that communicates that that is axe more or less effectively. Now the spike, again, not really worried about those details. I am just going to make it a spike. So a triangular shape that is going to become spike. Alrighty, and then remember at the beginning I did say that the way that I'm going to create the line art for this is going to be a little bit backwards. It's literally going to be backwards because I'm going to use the stroke tool in Photoshop to do it instead of doing it myself. So the stroke basically adds a line around a shape. If your shape is not correctly even, so if it's not like a vectorized shape or it has a lot of like missing areas, this is going to look really weird. This only really works if you have a shape that is fairly straight and cleanly drawn to begin with. Hence the use of all the vector tools when making it. So that's going to be the shape. The line is going to be like 3 or 4 pixels. It's not going to be incredibly tapered or deep. I mean, stroke can't really make a tapered line as far as I'm aware, not in Photoshop at least. And then I will hit OK. And now we have our axe with the stroke. I'm going to move this layer underneath Karlach so it looks a bit more accurate. And yeah, that looks like an axe as far as I'm concerned. So I'm not going to merge this stroke into the layer just yet. I still want it to be a separate thing while I add in sort of like highlight details and stuff. And like this is the best if you have just like a generic shape that you want to make. But you don't want to spend a lot of time trying to build it or even trying to use vector tools to build it, then this way does give you a thing and it's not that labor intensive. Okay, I think I do want to create some of the pattern on this because there's a little bit of a pattern on like the sides of the axe. I'm not going to do too much, I just kind of want to indicate that there is something there. So here too, just a little bit of an indication there's something there. Like there's some lines here as well. And over here. And that's behind her ear, so it doesn't really matter if you can see that or not. And then finally, I'm just going to make a little bit of a depth line to show that this isn't just like a flat thing that she's holding. It is a thing that has dimension even if it is somewhat flat. Okay. If I really wanted to, I could also add in these chips. So like the axe is chipped in quite a few places. So I'm going to add in some of those chips. I've still got smoothing on, so that's helping a lot with getting this to be accurate. Whoops, something happened there. Oh no. That's not what I wanted. Okay, so chips and scratches. Smoothing does not work very well with pressure settings. So if your pressure settings aren't doing what you want them to do and you have smoothing on, try turning smoothing off, and 9 out of 10 times it will fix the issue. Okay, unlock that. So that we can erase this. And remember, I still have stroke on, so it's also going to change how that kind of works. Okay, and then the final thing is right now, Karlak is just over the axe when she's supposed to be holding the axe. Even though her hand is there, the axe looks like something's wrong there. So we're just going to erase that. So smoothing is helpful here with erasing without over erasing. I just want to erase what should not be seen because the palm will be covering it over the axe. Probably also need to fix this where the line art went a little bit squonk. Just a little bit. Okay. And here as well where the line art went a little bit squonk. Let's turn that in, just invert that shape. We'll give it a little bit more dimension. So again, I don't really care about the actual shape of the pommel, the end of the axe here. I just want it to give the impression of sharp axe with sharpness. Okay. And here's now where I'm just going and staring at this and wondering if there was anything else that I've forgotten to add or that I wanted to add. I see there's like some gradients there. There's no real point in doing that. There's maybe a little bit of a point in adding a little bit more of a light texture. I think I said I was going to do that earlier and then I got distracted by something. I think I said I was just going to do a little bit of a lighter, like, line, sort of to kind of make this look more leathery and less anything else. I mean, the fact that it has so many straps already kind of communicates that it's going to be leathery, because what other than a leather outfit is going to be this strappy? I'm sure lots of things, but we're just going to go on the basis that this is leather. Gonna hide the marching ants because they're currently getting in the way. Yeah, I just want the kind of impression of like the leather being slightly shiny, just slightly. Nothing crazy. But like just that adds so much to the detail. Not that there wasn't already a crazy amount of detail. I actually struggled a bit to find references, like good references for this arm thing. So I did kind of just make it up as to what it probably looks like. I think it was fine. Okay, Control D to deselect. Karlak does have a tail. Oh my gosh, yes she does. How did I miss that? References. Because I didn't have any full body references except for this one where the tail is not really obvious. This is why you should always have several references, and if possible, try and get a turnaround of the character, like a turnaround that shows them from the back, the front, etc., because there's always going to be things that you'll miss. So, Karlak, tail. There we go. There's a nice reference with the tail showing. I don't know how the tail is coming out of those pants, but we make do. Funnily enough, this reference also gives me a nice side view that I didn't see before. So, thankfully, tails are really easy to add in post. So I'm just going to make one more layer. I'm going to call this layer Karlak because when I eventually merge them down, I don't want this to be called Karlak copy. Not that it really matters. Okay. I'm going to turn on my smoothing. And we're going to give her a little chibi tail. So with tails and things, it's way easier to simplify them. You could literally just do like a line and be like, cool, that's the tail. I think given how much detail we've already put into this chibi, that would be ridiculous. So we're not doing that. I am going to draw this properly. So I am just drawing out the tail. It's not a very long tail. It's not a very short tail, but it's definitely not a very long tail from this reference that I'm looking at. I just want to kind of connect those two lines and erase the excess. If you need to, turn up your smoothing. That's fine. Do what you need to do. Okay, I will fix that with the color, I think. And yeah, it's just a pretty generic tiefling demon tail. Like one triangle. Cool. And I'm gonna take the dark red. So now this is something that you need to keep in mind, because this does not terminate. It looked like it terminated because the character was in front of it, but it actually doesn't terminate, so you will need to terminate it. And my suggestion is terminate it with a round shape, not with a straight line, because if there is any overlap, a round shape is way easier to hide than a flat shape. It's the same principle for like creating cutout puppets for 2D animation. You never want a piece that cuts into another piece to be a jagged edge, because if anything goes wrong and like something moves, then everyone will be able to see that these two pieces are not fitting together. Whereas this is easier to see. What I should also do, in actuality, is I should make a duplicate of this. So basically, this is line art, color art. I'm not going to name them because they're only going to be here for about 10 seconds. But in having this over that one, I can just fill that with the darker color, with the lighter color. And then we have immediate line art. Then I merge these down. Cool. I'm just trying to make sure there's no like details that are in this. There probably are details within this tail, like scaling details. I'm now looking for like cosplay stuff again, because the cosplayers, they go hard on that detail. Yeah, so there's a little bit of like, I'm gonna call it like bone structure. There's a little bit of texture to the tail that's quite evident, I think, in the tail itself. So I'm going to add that. So lock off that layer, get the darker color, and just add like a couple of lines here to indicate that there is a texture here. I don't need to draw the actual texture, I just need to indicate that it exists. Alrighty. Cool. And then finally, I'm going to use linear dodge. We'll see how well this works. I just want to give the impression that there is some light on this tail. I don't know if this is going to work well. I think linear dodge is maybe too much. So instead of that, I'm just going to select the area and draw it in with normal. It kind of reminds me of a hot dog. Let's just not think about that, but it does kind of remind me of a hot dog. Okay, and then maybe like a little specular highlight there, just to indicate that that part is maybe smoother than the rest of it. And there we go. So merging everything down, so you always want to merge everything down to make sure that it is part of the same layer. And we have our chibi. Like, again, there's still stuff that I can do to this to improve upon it. Even with chibis, you should always rotate your canvas, which I haven't been doing. So, like, if there is a bit of an issue and things lean awkwardly to one side, because that's what happens with handedness, you can correct it. Generally, I do cheat correcting, so, like, I tend to correct a lot after the fact, even though I should be doing this during the drawing process, because sometimes if you correct after the fact, there's just stuff that you miss. Just that's not that's unavoidable if you're correcting after the fact. But I think that's fine. Rotate back. Yeah, cool. So that cheek looks a lot better from this angle. Okay, so that's it. So that was a 3-hour, yeah, it was a 3-hour stream. So actually not as long as I thought it was going to be. Thank you everyone who showed up for this. Really, really appreciate it. It was very fun to do. And again, I have Chibi comms open now, so just DM me on Discord, details in the description, if you would like to get your own. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.